The distress beacon was already 3 days old when Lieutenant Cole Hargrove pulled it from the garbage queue. Not metaphorical garbage. Actual garbage. Someone in signals had flagged it as sensor noise and routed it to the discard pile, and it would have died there, forgotten in the data graveyard of Deep Space Relay Station 5, if Cole hadn't been the kind of man who checked the discard pile on his lunch break. Habit. Stubbornness. Call it what you want. He almost missed it anyway. The signal was tiny. Not weak tiny, like a ship running on emergency power. Tiny in a way he had never seen before. Like the transmitter itself was physically small. Smaller than a human fist. The pulse pattern was distress, universal galactic standard. But the origin coordinates put it 3 kilometers outside the station's outer hull, drifting in open vacuum with no registered vessel attached. Cole chewed his sandwich and ran it twice. Same result. He told his supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Paula Vance, who looked at the coordinates, looked at the signal strength, and told him the transmitter had probably broken off some passing freighter, and he should log it and move on. He logged it. He did not move on. 4 hours later, he was suiting up in Base 7 with a handheld scanner and a retrieval kit, telling no one because telling someone would mean paperwork, and paperwork would mean waiting. And whatever was out there had been drifting for 3 days already. The vacuum outside the hull was the particular kind of silent that got into your bones if you let it. Cole did not let it. He had done 6 years of deep space salvage before transferring to signals. And silence was just silence, not a metaphor for anything. The scanner led him 40 meters off the outer hull to a debris cluster, the kind that gathered around stations like lint around a drain. Old parts, dead satellites, the stripped chassis of a cargo drone, and nestled between 2 dead solar panels, tumbling very slowly, was something that was not debris. It was roughly oval, dark green, almost black, about the size of a human head, maybe smaller, and it was producing the distress signal from somewhere inside a shell that looked organic rather than manufactured, like a seed or an egg. Except it wasn't either of those things, because when Cole brought his light to it, he could see a seam, a door, and through a crack in that door, a pale sliver of something that was watching him. He stopped. The sliver watched back. Cole had encountered 4 alien species in his career. 2 were humanoid. 1 communicated through color changes across its entire body surface. 1 had never successfully communicated at all. None of them had prepared him for this. "Hey," he said, which was not protocol. The sliver did not respond. He reached out slowly and touched the shell. It was cold. Whatever heat the occupant was producing was not enough to warm it against 3 days of vacuum. The structural integrity looked compromised on one side, a crack running from the seam to the lower curve, sealed from the inside with something that looked like dried resin. 3 days. Whatever was inside had been keeping itself alive in a cracked vessel for 3 days, with no rescue coming. Cole picked it up. It was lighter than he expected. Barely 2 kilograms, including the shell. No, he tucked it against his chest, secured it with 1 arm, and then started back toward the airlock. "You're okay," he said, which was also not protocol, and also not something he could actually promise. The sliver behind the cracked door shifted. Just barely. But it shifted toward him. Back inside, Cole set the vessel on a workbench in an unused storage bay, 2 decks below the main corridor. Away from foot traffic. Away from people who would ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. No, he ran a full atmospheric scan of the interior through the crack and got back a composition that was breathable for humans with slightly elevated nitrogen, which meant breathable for the occupant too, since it had survived in it this long. He ran a biological scan. The results came back, and he stared at them for a long time. One life sign: warm-blooded, oxygen-dependent, approximately 0.3 kilograms of biological mass. 0.3. He looked at the vessel. He looked at the scan results. He ran it again. Same number. He pulled up the Galactic Species Index, which Station 5 kept on a local server because deep space comms were unreliable for real-time queries, and he started searching by biology profile. Warm-blooded. Bipedal, the scan suggested, though the imaging through the shell was imprecise. Oxygen-dependent. Size range consistent with a juvenile of several known species, or an adult of one. He found it 20 minutes later, buried in the index under a listing so short it barely filled half a screen. The Veth, a species formerly registered with the Galactic Council 40 years ago. Sentient, tool-using, spacefaring, technically, though the index noted that their vessels were hand-built and individually crewed. Population unknown. Council status listed as observer, which was the lowest possible classification, the one that meant the Council acknowledged your existence, but did not extend you a seat or a vote or, apparently, a rescue response. The index had one photograph. Cole looked at it for a long time. The Veth in the photograph was standing next to a human diplomat for scale. The diplomat was not a tall man. The Veth came to his knee. He looked at the cracked vessel on his workbench. 0.3 kilograms. He got up and found a thermal blanket and wrapped it carefully around the shell without covering the cracked seam, leaving the sliver of pale watching space open, because whatever was inside had earned the right to see out. "I'm not going to report you yet," he said. "Not until you're warm." The station hummed around him. 3 shifts of 200 people, none of them knowing about this, none of them looking. He sat down on a crate and opened his scanner and started reading everything the index had on the Veth, which was not very much. Bubak and thinking about the word observer and what it actually meant when you were 0.3 kilograms and your cracked survival pod had been in the garbage queue for 3 days. It meant you could die out there and the Council would note it. That was all. Cole kept reading. By hour 6, the occupant opened the door. Not all the way. Just enough that Cole could see what the photograph had not prepared him for, which was the face. The index image had been taken from a distance by someone who had not been particularly interested in getting closer. What Cole saw now, in the low light of the storage bay, 2 meters away on a workbench wrapped in a thermal blanket, was a face the size of his palm. Large eyes. Dark, the particular dark of deep water with no visible whites. A flat nose, barely a ridge. A mouth that was closed and pressed into a line that read, "The even across the full distance of 2 entirely different evolutionary histories," as someone who was not going to show fear even if it cost them. The Veth was looking at him. Cole did not move. The face was also scratched. Along one cheekbone, a thin, dark line that had dried and crusted. It matched the crack in the shell, which meant when the vessel had taken damage, the occupant had taken it too. 3 days with that, in a cracked pod in vacuum, watching no one come. "My name's Cole," he said. The Veth said something. The sound was high, precise, multiple tones layered into each other in a way that his ears registered as a single word, but his brain could not begin to parse. "I don't have a translator," he said. "I'm sorry." The Veth looked at him, then looked around the storage bay with the methodical sweep of someone assessing a space for exits and threats, which was a very recognizable behavior. Then Cole felt something in his chest do a thing he couldn't name. The Veth looked back at him. Then, slowly, With the deliberateness of someone making a decision they had not made lightly, it stepped out of the pod and stood on the workbench. 0.3 kilograms. Standing. It came to Cole's wrist when he was sitting on the crate. It had 4 limbs, bipedal with a second pair of arms folded against its torso, all 4 ending in hands with 6 fingers each. And it was wearing something that had once been a suit and was now held together by the same resin it had used to patch the pod crack. The suit had markings on it, insignia, rank probably, in colors that were partially obscured by damage. It stood and it looked at him, and it did not ask for help. It did not gesture. It just stood, like it was waiting to find out what kind of person he was before it decided anything else. Cole reached into his kit bag and pulled out a ration bar. He broke off a piece roughly the size of his thumbnail, which was roughly the size of what he guessed was a full meal for something that weighed 0.3 kilograms, and set it on the workbench 2 hand lengths away. Not close enough to crowd, not far enough to be a statement. The Veth looked at the piece of ration bar, looked at him, looked at the ration bar again. Then it walked to it, picked it up in 6-fingered hands, and ate it with the careful efficiency of someone who was very hungry and was not going to let that show. Cole watched and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the situation wasn't already saying. He pulled out his tablet and opened a translation program. A basic one, not configured for Veth, but configurable if he had enough audio samples. He held it up so the Veth could see the microphone indicator. The Veth looked at it. Then it spoke again. The same layered tones, deliberate, spaced, feeding him samples. Cole started the calibration. Outside the storage bay, Station 5 hummed along its 3-shift schedule. Paperwork moved through inboxes. The garbage queue processed its discards. Lieutenant Commander Vance approved 17 routine logs, none of which included an entry for one very small, very alive survivor who had been 3 days in vacuum and was now sitting on a workbench in a storage bay 2 decks down, eating a piece of ration bar and teaching a human to understand her. Her. The translation program flagged it in its first rough pass. Pronoun inference from tonal patterns. High probability female. Cole updated his mental notes. She was watching the tablet work, watching the waveforms it drew when she spoke. She pointed at one, then at herself, then at Cole. Inflection shifted. Question. Definitely a question. Working on it, he said. She made a sound that the program flagged as unknown. No translation available. But that hit Cole's ears in a way that felt, inescapably, like impatience. Good, he thought. She was feeling things clearly enough to express them. That was a good sign. He worked. She fed him more samples. By hour 9, the program had enough to give him rough phoneme mappings, and he could pick out individual words if he listened hard. Her name was something the program rendered as Z. 2 tones collapsed into one character, and she said it only once. And at the beginning, when he asked directly, like it was information she was providing rather than an introduction she was making. By hour 10, he had the shape of what had happened to her. She had been traveling alone. Single-occupant vessel, hand-built, which the index had told him was standard for the Veth. Her course had clipped the edge of a debris field near the station's outer marker, the same debris field where he had found her, when the impact had cracked the pod and disabled propulsion and communication simultaneously. She had rerouted power to the distress beacon and waited. 3 days. Did anyone respond? He asked. She looked at him, said one word. The program translated it as, you. Cole was quiet for a moment. Before me, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, No. He pulled the Galactic Council complaint log from the station's public server, the one that logged all distress signals received and routed. He found hers in 12 seconds. Flagged as low-priority non-member vessel, routed to secondary queue, reflagged as probable equipment noise, archived. 3 automated systems had processed her call for help and thrown it away. Cole closed the log. Z was watching him. The large, dark eyes steady, no whites to show expression in the way human eyes did. But something in the set of her face, in the way she was sitting, told him she already knew this. She had known it while she was waiting. She had probably known it before the waiting started. Observer status. That was what that meant. In practice, in a vacuum, at 0.3 kilograms, in a cracked pod. Okay, Cole said. Not to her specifically, more to the situation. Okay. He picked up his personal comm and started drafting a report. Not the official one. Not yet. A different kind. The kind with specific timestamps, specific system logs, specific queue routing records attached, addressed to 3 separate offices, including one outside the station's reporting chain. Z watched him type. I'm making noise, he explained. She said something. The program gave him large noise or small noise. He thought about it. Both, he said. She made the impatient sound again, but quieter this time. And then she said something else. Something the program struggled with for a long second before rendering it imperfectly as about time. Cole's report hit 4 desks before anyone read it. The first 3 inboxes it landed in belonged to people who were very busy with things that mattered. And a distress beacon misrouting was, on the scale of things that mattered, not particularly high. They flagged it for follow-up and moved on with their mornings. The 4th inbox belonged to a woman named Diane Ortiz, who was the deputy director of the council's non-member contact office, which was an office that existed mainly to process paperwork and had not been tested by an actual case in 11 years. Diane Ortiz had held the position for 9 of those 11 years and had, in that time, developed a very specific relationship with bureaucratic failure. She cataloged it. Not officially, personally. A running document on her home system that she had started as a way to process frustration and had become, over 9 years, a detailed record of every way the system failed the species it claimed to be supporting. She read Cole's report in 4 minutes. Then she read the attached queue logs. Then she opened her personal document, added an entry dated that day, and then did something she had not done in a long time. She picked up her direct comm and called the station. Cole was in the storage bay when his personal comm buzzed with a contact from a council relay address. Z was asleep, but she had fallen asleep sitting upright on the workbench 3 hours ago, which he gathered was a deliberate posture for her species rather than a collapse, because she had not moved and her breathing was steady, and she had positioned herself facing the door before she closed her eyes. He stepped into the corridor to take the call. The woman on the other end did not introduce herself with her title. She said, "You attached 47 pages of logs to a distress misrouting complaint. Most people send 2 paragraphs. Most people don't pull the queue records," Cole said. A pause. What's her status? Stable. Malnourished, minor wound on her face, still has full function. She's been teaching herself my translation program from the inside out while I sleep. Another pause, longer. You left her with your tablet. She was bored. Lieutenant Hargrove, the Veth are not formally recognized as a protected species under Council Charter. The station's legal obligation to her is essentially non-existent. I know. I'm telling you that because if this becomes a formal case, and I think it should, the station's administration is going to say exactly that. They can say it, Cole said. I'll have a response ready. Diane Ortiz was quiet for a moment. Then, what response? Cole leaned against the corridor wall. That legal obligation and basic decency are different categories. And confusing them is how you end up with a species in your garbage queue. The pause was very long this time. I'm sending a formal inquiry to the station commander in 2 hours, Diane said. It will name you as the discovering officer, and it will require a full status report. That puts this on record in a way that can't be quietly archived. Good. It will also make you the de facto responsible party for her well-being while she's on station, which means paperwork. Significant paperwork. I like paperwork, Cole said. He heard something that might have been a surprised breath. Then, I'll be in touch. He went back into the storage bay. Xi was awake. She was sitting with his tablet in her lap, both pairs of hands working the screen. And she had navigated out of the translation program and into the station's public data directory, which was accessible without credentials, and she was reading. He looked at what she was reading. She had found the Galactic Council Species Registry. She had found her own entry. She was reading the 14 lines that constituted the full official record of her species' existence in the known universe. Cole sat down on his crate and waited. She read for a long time. Then she set the tablet down. She said something. The translation program, running on the tablet, rendered it 14 lines. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say. She said something else, and the program took longer with this one. It came back with, "They wrote us very small." Cole thought about the debris field, the garbage queue, 3 automated systems, and then silence for 3 days. "Yeah," he said. "They did." She looked at him, the dark eyes steady. Then she said one more thing, and the program rendered it imperfectly, missing some tones, but the shape of it was clear. "You did not." He picked up his tablet and showed her the message Diane Ortiz had just sent. He knew she couldn't read the characters, but she could see the council header. She could see the length of it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at him. And she said in 2 tones that the program had learned well enough by now to catch clearly. "Show me how." The formal inquiry landed on Station Commander Greg Pelham's desk at 0900, and he read it twice, and then called his administrative officer, Lieutenant Karen Dale. Yasin asked her to verify that a distress signal had genuinely been archived as equipment noise while an occupant was alive inside it. Karen checked. She came back in 15 minutes. She said yes. Greg sat with that for a moment. He was not a cruel man. He was also not a man who had spent much energy thinking about species listed under observer status, because observer status species existed at the very edge of his operational framework, and the edges were where the details fell through. That was not an excuse. It was a description. He was aware of the difference. He called Cole directly. Cole answered from the storage bay, which Greg noted because Cole had apparently been sleeping there, which meant the situation had been going on for over 30 hours and had not come up through any official channel until Diane Ortiz's inquiry forced it. "Why didn't you report it through standard channels?" Greg asked. "Because standard channels processed her distress beacon as garbage twice already," Cole said. "Sir." The Caesar was not insubordinate. It was just very precisely placed. Greg rubbed his face. "What does she need?" "A proper medical scan, a workspace she can use. She's been trying to assess her pod's repair needs, but she needs tools she can actually hold. And someone to contact her homeworld or whatever counts as her homeworld authority, Because she's been alone out here and someone should know she's alive. Veth homeworld contact information? The Council Index has a relay frequency. It's untested. No one's used it in 6 years. Greg was quiet. Then, get her to medical. I'll have them adjust the equipment scale. And Hargrove. Sir, that 47-page log you sent to Ortiz, good work. It was 49 pages, sir. A beat. Get to medical. G did not like medical. This was clear from the moment Cole brought her in, and the attending physician, a practical man named Dr. Leon Marsh, looked at her, and then at Cole, and then at his equipment, and visibly recalibrated an entire morning's assumptions. Leon was a good doctor. He did not fuss. He rebuilt a scanning array out of the imaging equipment they used for infant cases and got her on a surface at the right scale and did his job. And G tolerated it with the same composed deliberateness she brought to everything, watching every instrument with the focused attention of someone filing the information away. Her wound was superficial. Cleaned, sealed with a gel that Leon carefully confirmed was safe for her biology. Her nutritional levels were low, but not critical. Her cardiovascular and respiratory systems were functioning normally for her species, which Leon was reading about in real time from the index, because he had not known the Veth existed before this morning. She watched him read. After the scan, he set down the tablet and looked at her directly and said, very plainly, "You're in good shape, all things considered." G looked at Cole. Cole translated. She said something back. Leon looked at Cole. "She says she's aware," Cole said. Leon almost smiled. "I'm going to prepare a nutrition recommendation, adjusted for her mass, on when I'd like her to check back in 48 hours. Cole translated. G responded. Cole turned to Leon. "She wants a copy of the scan data for her own records." Leon pulled it without hesitation and transferred it to the tablet Z had apparently now claimed as her own. She checked the file arrived, checked it opened correctly, and then looked up with what was, even across 2 evolutionary histories, clearly a nod. Leon nodded back. In the corridor afterward, Cole walking and G sitting on his shoulder because the corridor's scale made walking impractical for her. He thought about all the places she had been in the last day that had required humans to adjust their world to fit her instead of the other way around, and how each one of those adjustments had been made without complaint by people who had simply been told the situation and responded to it. Leon rebuilding his scanner array. Karen pulling the Q logs without being asked twice. Here's Greg saying 49 pages and moving on. It was not a transformation. It was not the system fixing itself. It was a handful of people doing the next right thing in sequence. G was quiet on his shoulder. He could feel her weight, which was almost nothing. And then he could feel her looking at the corridor ahead of them. She said something. The program had been running long enough now that it caught most of it. It rendered, "This place was not built for me, but some of the people in it were." Cole thought about that for the rest of the walk. Back in the storage bay, which had unofficially become her space and his workspace simultaneously, she sat with the pod repair manifest she had been building, and he sat with his tablet, and they worked in the same room without speaking for 2 hours. Which was, he was realizing, how she seemed to prefer company. Present and functional and not demanding anything from her that she wasn't ready to give. Not at hour 3 she said his name. His actual name, not translated. The 2 sounds of it reproduced with the layered precision she brought to everything. He looked up. She held up the repair manifest. He looked at it. 3 pages of component needs, cross-referenced with the station's parts inventory, which she had accessed through the public directory. She had flagged 12 components as available on station. She had flagged 3 as not available and had written, and in the translation program's rendered text, the nearest alternative with a note on how to adapt it. She had done this herself, in 2 hours, in a system she had learned from scratch in 36 hours. Cole looked at the list, then at her. She said, "I want to go home." "I know," he said. He picked up his comm and called Karen Dale. And the next thing began. The Veth Homeworld relay frequency had not been used in 6 years, which meant it took 4 hours to confirm it was still active and another 3 to get a response. Cole was not there for the response. He was in the parts bay with a station technician named Pete Garza, who was 6'4" and had the largest hands Cole had ever seen on a human being, and who was currently hunched over a workbench attempting to handle components that were scaled for fingers a third the size of his, following a repair manifest written by G, who was standing 3 inches tall on the bench next to him and pointing at each component in sequence. Pete was not a man of many words. He had been told, "Small alien, needs her ship fixed. Here is the list." He had said, "Okay." He had not once expressed any opinion about the situation beyond the practical questions of how and in what order. Z had, within about 20 minutes, clearly decided Pete was acceptable, and this assessment came through not in words, but in posture. She stopped watching his hands for errors and started just pointing forward to the next step, which Cole, running the translation between them, recognized as a significant shift. "She trusts you," Cole told Pete. Pete looked at the workbench, looked at G. "She shouldn't yet. I haven't fixed anything." G said something. Cole translated. "She says you haven't broken anything either. Apparently that counts." Pete went back to work. The relay response came in through Diane Ortiz's office at hour 7, routed to the station with a priority flag that made Karen Dale sit up at her desk and call Greg Pelham before she opened it. The message was in Veth. The station had no Veth translator on file. It took another 2 hours to get an adequate rendering through the translation program, which Cole ran personally because he had more audio sample data than any other system on station at this point. The message was from a Veth council, not a government in the human sense, something the index described as a distributed authority structure, which in practice seemed to mean a group of elders who made decisions collectively and did not do so quickly. They had been notified of G's status. They had acknowledged this notification. They had one question. Why had the distress beacon gone unanswered for 3 days? Cole wrote the response himself, with Diane Ortiz reviewing it. And it was not the response of someone trying to minimize or explain away. It was the response of someone laying out exactly what had happened. The automatic routing, the observer status flag, the archival as noise, the queue logs attached again in full. He included the 49 pages. Diane added a formal council acknowledgement of failure in contact protocol and a proposal, written in 3 paragraphs, to update the observer status tier's distress beacon priority routing to match member species. G was sitting next to Cole when he sent it. She had read the response draft twice. She had made 2 corrections to the translation, both technical, both precise. She had not commented on the content. After he sent it, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "They will debate this for months." "Probably," Cole said. She said, "This is how things change slowly." "Yes." She looked at him. And then, "Is there a way things change faster?" Cole thought about Pete Garza not breaking anything, and Leon Marsh rebuilding his scanner array, and Karen Dale pulling 49 pages of logs without being asked, and Greg Pelham saying 49, not 47, because he had actually read it. "Yeah," he said. one person at a time. Xi was quiet again. Then she said something the program had to work on for a moment. It came back with, "That is inefficient." "Extremely," Cole agreed. She made the impatient sound. Then she said, "Then we should not waste time." The pod was operational in 6 days. Pete Garza had worked 12-hour shifts, 3 of them back-to-back with coffee as his only variable, and the 3 unavailable components had been adapted by Xi herself using the station's machine shop, which required Pete to do the physical work while she directed from his shoulder and Cole translated and the machinist on duty, a woman named Bev Santos, watched with the concentrated attention of someone seeing a technique she had never considered and storing it away. On the day the pod cleared its diagnostic, Xi stood inside it with the hatch open and looked out at the storage bay, which had been cleared enough to hold the pod on a workbench at standing height. And Cole stood in front of her with his hands in his pockets because there was nothing useful to do with his hands at this point, and he knew it. The Galactic Council had not yet changed the routing protocol. That would take months. Diane Ortiz had told him this was fast, by council standards, and he had taken her word for it. The Veth Council had sent a second message. It had contained coordinates for a Veth settlement station and a set of encrypted codes that the translation program rendered as, "Present these. You will be received." Xi had copied the codes to her pod's nav system and then, apparently, memorized them, because she had run her fingers over the entry 3 times in a way that looked like confirmation. Now she looked at Cole. She said his name the way she had learned to say it, the 2 sounds precise. Then she said, "You saw more." He did not say, "What do you mean?" because he knew. The index had 14 lines. The queue system had an observer flag, 3 automated processes, and silence. Biosa, everything in the framework he worked in, had looked at the Veth and calculated a very specific low number for their weight. He had pulled a signal from a garbage queue on his lunch break because he checked the garbage queue on his lunch break. That was all. That was the full extent of the heroism. "I just looked," he said. She said, "Yes." Then she said something the program had not translated before and worked on for a long moment. It came back uncertain, flagged low confidence. But the shape of it was, "That is what most do not do." Pete Garza was standing at the back of the storage bay with his arms crossed because he had nowhere to be, but had stayed anyway. Bev Santos was beside him. Leon Marsh had come down from medical with no stated reason. Karen Dale was in the doorway. Xi looked at all of them, one at a time. The methodical assessment sweep, the same one she had done on day 1 in the storage bay, checking exits and threats. This time she was not checking for exits. She said something. Cole translated. She says thank you, but she says it in the plural. Nobody said you're welcome because it did not feel like a you're welcome moment. It felt like a moment that asked to be held. The pod's navigation system ran its final check. Green across the board. Xi looked at Cole one more time. She said, "I will tell them what I found here." Or he said, "Tell them about the people." She said, "I will tell them there were 14 lines, and then there was a human who looked." He did not have a response to that. He just nodded. The pod hatch sealed. It was very small, moving through the airlock, almost too small to track on the bay monitor. The camera followed it out into open space. And then it was in the dark, and the dark did not change to accommodate it. But it moved, small and steady and intact, carrying its pilot home. Cole stood in front of the bay monitor with his hands in his pockets until the signal became a dot, and the dot became a coordinate, and the coordinate moved past the station's outer marker into deep space. Then he turned around. Karen was still in the doorway. Pete and Bev and Leon in a loose cluster. Nobody leaving. "All right," Cole said. He went to his console. He pulled up the Council Distress Routing Protocol document, the one Diane Ortiz had flagged as pending review, and then opened a new comment thread on the section covering observer status beacons. He started typing. It was going to be a long comment. He was okay with that. Outside, in the deep space dark, something very small moved at speed through the stars, going home.